This is Bruce Lee. And he is the greatest martial artist that world has ever seen. Being the only person who could do one-handed two-finger push-ups, two-handed one-thumb push-ups, while kicking a 700-pound punching bag to the ceiling and achieving an extraordinary physique with less than 1% body fat. He is officially considered a superhuman. But have you ever wondered what it really takes to become the number one? Just like Bruce Lee? You probably haven't, but it's way easier than you might think. And in today's video, you're gonna learn all the untold secrets that you can use to become exactly as successful just as Bruce Lee was. So by the end of the video, you will have learned all the necessary steps that you need in order to achieve every single goal that you set, just by following the exact same principles that Bruce Lee used to reach his full potential.
But unlike other content creators who are filming videos about Bruce Lee and then mainly talking about his achievements in terms of martial arts, here I want to focus on his other side. Because in order to really find an answer on how he managed to become that powerful and achieve every single goal that he set, we really have to understand something I call the winner's mindset. So it's the difference in mindsets that separates winners from losers, rich ones from poor ones, hardworking from lazy ones. Despite that, most people still live in delusion that luck is the main and most important factor of one's success, and that the successful ones were previously the lucky ones, which of course is not true. But if you take a closer look at Bruce Lee's life, which we're going to do in a minute, you'll instantly notice that his success was determined by one thing, and yeah, you guessed it right, it's not luck. Because if anyone was unlucky, it was Bruce Lee. His life was full of obstacles that he had to overcome on his own. And if he was really lucky, many of those obstacles would never have appeared to him. So let's see what Bruce Lee's life was like, and what can we learn from it.
My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee.
First, I would like to reveal to you one thing that I am sure very few of you know about Bruce Lee, and that is that he was a passionate philosopher. Even his martial arts style, which he called
The art of fighting without fighting,
was the reflection of his inner thoughts and goals to become a better version of himself. Everything he did in life rested on universal principles of philosophy that had been known to people for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It is precisely this knowledge, for the study of which Bruce Lee devoted the entire 17 years, that I present to you here. The lessons you can learn from his turbulent and exciting life are truly worth your attention and time. And maybe you don't realize that, but having an opportunity to learn on someone else's mistakes and discover the secrets of the successful people who dedicated their whole life just to find these proven principles to becoming the best possible version of yourself is a priceless treasure. And now you're going to get all that lifelong experience in less than 1 hour, which, if you ask me, is an opportunity you should not miss.
So the first interesting and attention-catching part of Bruce Lee's life is his date of birth. He was born on November 27th, 1940, in San Francisco, in America. And he was lucky. Oops, I said he didn't have much luck. But let's say this was a lucky circumstance for him later in life. So being born in America enabled him later to move there and study at university, then start the first Kung Fu school, find a wife, become a Hollywood star, and so much more. But there is something else very few people know about the time he was born. And that fact that you're going to hear right now really left a big impression on me when I first heard it. Just being born in 1940, which is the year of the dragon, was really impressive. Because, you know, in China they use different method for tracking stars and astrology, so their zodiac signs don't match with ours. But just for the illustration, I'll mention a few interesting traits that every person born in the year of the dragon has. Some of them include that a person is charismatic, ambitious, and determined, self-confident, but also energetic and dynamic. Even though these qualities are really good to possess, and you may think, well, if I had all those qualities, I could be another Bruce Lee. But here's the interesting part. So not only was he born in the year of the dragon, but also in the hour of the dragon. Imagine that energy of two dragons adding up and making a two-headed dragon. Okay, sorry, maybe that's too much imagination. But that combination is So powerful just by itself. But enough with astrology. It's not that I don't trust astrology. I mean, I do, but we got to keep moving on. So as I said, being born both in a year and in an hour of the dragon definitely makes you special, but it takes way more than that to become Bruce Lee. So let's keep moving until we figure out how to become another Bruce Lee. So he spent his early childhood growing up in Hong Kong. And the most interesting thing about that period in his life is that he really had trouble avoiding street fights. Or let me be more precise, he was causing them. His parents had a really hard time with him because a lot of people were complaining about him and about his aggressiveness. Having to deal with all those problems, his parents thought it would be a good idea to enroll him in the martial arts school. So why did they do that? First, they saw that their son has a very big desire to fight. So they thought that martial arts would not only satisfy his desire to fight, but what is even more important, and that's the hope they had, that in the martial arts school, he would learn to use his fighting skills, not to cause trouble at the streets of Hong Kong anymore, but they become aware of his deeds and to protect the ones who are weaker and never to attack unless attacked. So that's how he started learning Wing Chun when he was 16. And his teacher was the famous Wing Chun master, Ip Man. Ip Man was the pioneer in Wing Chun at that time, and having him as a teacher must have been a great honor. But having Bruce Lee as a pupil was even bigger honor for Ip Man, if we look at that from today's perspective. So he started teaching Bruce some basic techniques first, but Bruce was a fast and ambitious learner who wanted to learn even more and to become even more powerful. And the only thing that was standing in his way, according to Ip Man and his parents, was his temperament. Being born both in year and in an hour of the dragon brings with it some bad things. One of them is his aggressiveness and willingness to defend the weaker at all costs. He wanted justice above everything and did not hold back if it had to be achieved by fighting. So many times Ip Man had to tell him not to use his anger when punching, because anger is, unlike most people think, your worst enemy in a fight. Getting overwhelmed with anger in the middle of a fight can lead to a loss even against the weaker opponent. But Bruce didn't want to listen. He was stubborn and thought that a man without anger is just a coward, if not a weakling. Full of rage and anger, he headed for the riverbank and got into an abandoned boat and sailed away. He wanted to be alone. It was the first time in his life that he was so angry. Ip Man even threatened him that if he didn't learn to control his anger, he would no longer be his student. It hit him really hard. Moving away from the shore, he became more and more angry and unable to stand it any longer. So he leaned towards the edge of the boat and hit the water with all his might. But that moment will change his life forever. That punch into the water will be a turning point in his life, the path to his self-realization. And if it wasn't for the fact that he criticized him so harshly, we wouldn't be watching movies about the best fighter of all time today, nor would we mention his name with admiration today. And maybe we wouldn't even know who he is. Well, what happened so important when he hit the water? And how did such a seemingly banal thing affect his life to such an extent? When he hit the water with all his might, what he noticed was that the water just slipped away under his blow. It didn't suffer pain. It didn't break. It didn't resist. The water just slipped away, adjusted to his blow, and when he pulled his hand, it came back to its original position. Unlike a tree that would snap under the blow of a guy's fist who was filled with rage, the water so gently depended on that blow, and it didn't hurt at all. Water, which then adapted to the shape of his fist, will forever become a symbol of his highest values and goals. It will become his ideal.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup. becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
What he realized that day was that what Ip Man told him was exactly that. When someone hits you, adapt. Don't resist directly, but adapt to every new situation, just like the water did when Bruce hit it. On that day, the old Bruce Lee died, and the new, better one was born, the one we all know today as the greatest fighter of all time. The very next day at school with Ip Man, Bruce told him about yesterday's event, to which Ip Man said, "I'm glad you learned your lesson yourself, because if it wasn't for me, I really would have been forced to stop teaching you." Bruce was happy. Soon after, it was time for him to go to university. However, Bruce Lee still loved fighting more than anything, and simply couldn't imagine himself doing anything else but fighting, because he knew that he wouldn't be able to fight on the streets of Hong Kong, and otherwise he wouldn't have done it anymore. After he learned a lesson that day in the boat while sailing, his parents took the decision for him and sent him to America to study in Seattle. In other words, from the day he hit the water, he became a calmer man. He became peaceful, or better said, a desire to be peaceful was born in him, and he saw philosophy as the only means to that end. His role models were various philosophers like Lao Tzu, Chuang Tzu, and Miyamoto Musashi, but none of them had the impact as big as Jiddu Krishnamurti, and this is exactly what no one knows about Bruce Lee. And that is that his spiritual side and its development are much more impressive parts of his personality than the martial arts themselves. Of course, I don't want to invalidate all his achievements in martial arts, or any of his achievements, because guys, before him, no one had done push-ups on one hand, let alone on only 2 fingers. And we definitely admired his abs and biceps many times during the Dragon's Nest movies. However, in order to achieve all that, he had to train a lot, and some even say that he was able to train up to 14 hours a day. However, I will not deal here with the truth of those claims, if he was really able to train that much or not, although that is not a bad idea for one of the next videos, to deal with whether it is really possible to train for that long, and not just for one day.
That's kind of ridiculous!
But for days, weeks, months, and even years.
2,000 years later.
We know that they say that Lee was superhuman, but 14 hours is still 2/3 of a day, and that is not a little, even for someone who is considered superhuman. However, what few people wonder when they hear how much he trained, or at least when they see him, is where does he get such motivation for training? That's a really good question. Because just imagine how much motivation you need to have to do something for 2/3 days and repeat that for years. Well, how many of you have tried doing anything for 14 hours a day, at least for one day? I honestly never did. I've never even slept for so long, let alone do the same thing all day. I used to work 14 hours, and there were a lot of days like that, but doing one thing for so long is really exhausting. There is no doubt that it was exhausting for him too, but imagine how strong his will had to be in order for him to exercise for so long. And in order for a desire to be strong, it must be in the depths of a person's soul. That is the first condition. But in order for a person to implant any desire in the depth of his soul, that desire must burn in him like a flame for a very long time. Here, imagine desire as a small flame. In the beginning, it is small, an idea has just been born, but it is still as weak as a small flame. If it is not nurtured and cared for, that flame is easily extinguished. We are often held back by our disdain for the people around us in our goals, saying that we will never succeed because it's either too hard, or they think we are not capable of it, or blah blah blah. People will always have something to hold you back, but if you resist it, that desire continues to grow because you continue to indulge in that activity every day. Let's say you like to draw a lot. The first time you take and draw a cat, and everyone gets amazed. Now, you must be thinking that you are a good painter. So a little flame of a painter was born in you. Every time in the future you get complimented on how you draw a picture very well, that flame becomes bigger. But if you go to, let's say, a friend, and he starts laughing and says that he would rather imagine you working at a pump than as a painter, you start to doubt yourself. Tomorrow you go to school and the art teacher tells you to stop painting because it's not for you. Day by day, your flame is extinguished. But why let someone out there, even if it were your parents, to put out your flame? By this, I do not want to say that you shouldn't listen to the advice that people give you, because sometimes they are even right. Don't be vain when they criticize you. Try to see if what someone says is true. If not, forget everything he said. Bruce knew all of this, and it was he who went against his parents' wishes to rekindle his flame. Namely, his parents sent him to Seattle to become calmer, not to say a normal person, but to wean himself from fighting and martial arts. And they did it with the best of intentions, because they were afraid for him. They were afraid that he would become a bully who easily gets into street fights, or worse, to become a member of some mafia, and then his parents' hearts would break with grief. However, they were unaware of how much he had actually changed since the day he sailed on the boat. Of course, he never stopped, nor will he ever stop loving martial arts. But what was certain, just that his parents didn't know it, is that he would turn that love for martial arts into a much bigger and nobler goal than mere street fights. What he wanted was to present the Eastern tradition of martial arts in the best light to the Western hemisphere of the planet, because he considered Wing Chun, that is Chinese Kung Fu, arguably the best martial art that he wanted to popularize in the West. There were many reasons for this, but perhaps the most basic reason why he wanted it was for the West, which was otherwise teeming with prejudices about Eastern culture, to show them the beauty and effectiveness of Kung Fu. I mean, he really loved Kung Fu.
I love Kung Fu!
And wanted to instill that love for Kung Fu in others. That is how he opened his first martial arts school in Seattle, which at that time was one of the very few schools where Chinese martial arts were taught. Already back then, we can see how China slowly begins to spread its influence through ambitious individuals in various fields, in this case, in the domain of martial arts. Of course, don't get me wrong, neither the Chinese government nor anyone in China sent Bruce Lee to America to spread its influence. And if you have listened carefully to the video until now, I think it is clear to you that this was not the case. However, Bruce's martial arts school differed from other Chinese martial arts schools in one thing. And precisely because of that one thing, a conflict will soon arise between his and other Chinese martial arts schools in Seattle. And that conflict will be so serious that Bruce Lee's school, as well as all his dreams of establishing one school in each Federal Republic of the USA, reached the brink of existence. What distinguished Bruce Lee's school from other schools was that he looked at all people as human beings and did not label them according to their race. At that time, not only in America, but mainly in it, there was a pronounced tendency for races not to mix, and there was a feeling of superiority of the white race over the yellow race. Therefore, the Chinese organized their own little Chinese quarters, not wanting to mix with the Americans because they knew what the Americans thought of them. And of course, the Chinese didn't think the best of them either. That is why, in the majority of Chinese martial arts schools in America at that time, Americans were forbidden to enter and learn the martial arts that Chinese masters were developing and preserving for centuries in ancient monasteries in China, including the famous Shaolin Temple. Few people also know that Bruce Lee was also in Shaolin and developed his Kung Fu skills there. The Chinese in Seattle were at first very unpleasantly surprised by Bruce Lee's decision that whites also learn Kung Fu skills, and that he allowed whites to access the knowledge that had been learned and preserved for so long in the Shaolin Monastery as a symbol of Chinese tradition. That tradition and those exceptional martial arts were never allowed to fall into the hands of another nation. And if you ask me, that attitude of Chinese schools and masters in Seattle is completely logical and justified. Elite knowledge acquired over centuries is too valuable to be given away so easily. The Chinese have always known how to guard their national and racial identity, which is really commendable, because that is the only way a nation can progress, investing in their own people, not others. However, Bruce Lee was of a completely opposite opinion. He was not limited, and he looked at people as creatures that God had created, no matter what color their skin was.
You still think of yourself Chinese, or do you ever think of yourself as North American?
You know what I want to think of myself? As a human being. Because, I mean, I don't want to sound like, as Confucius say, but under the sky, under the heaven, man, there is but one family. It just so happened, man, that people are different.
What he said on the question of prejudice against other races is really interesting and noble.
Let me ask you, however, about the problems that you face as a Chinese hero in an American series. Have people come up in the industry and said, well, we don't know how the audience are going to take a non-American?
Well, such question has been raised. In fact, it is being discussed, and that is why The Warrior is not going to be on.
I see.
You see, because unfortunately, such thing does exist in this world. You see, like, I don't know, certain part of the country, right, where like they think that business-wise it's a risk. And I don't blame them, I mean, in the same way, it's like in Hong Kong, if a foreigner come and became a star, if I were the man with the money, I probably would have my own worry of whether or not the acceptance would be there. But that's all right, because if you honestly express yourself, it doesn't matter, see?
Bruce Lee's thinking was much higher than the thinking of other Chinese teachers. But unfortunately, people then, and still today, were full of prejudices about people who are not of the same skin color as them. And as we know, there are many conflicts whose cause was racial disagreement. Bruce knew that this racial gratification only separates people, alienates them from each other, and in the end, they become enemies. He looked at people and valued them based on what they were like, and not based on the color of their skin, which was not often the case at that time. And so the Chinese teachers agreed that it cannot go on like that anymore. Bruce is violating Chinese tradition and tarnishing their name, and they decided that they must stop him from doing so, even if they need to use brute force for that.
Chinese schools masters chose Wang Jackman as their representative, who will send the ultimatum to Bruce Lee. That ultimatum was based on a threat, or rather blackmail, that was directed at Bruce Lee. What the Chinese schools and Wang Jackman as their main representative asked him to do was to ban white people from entering their Chinese schools. Bruce Lee ignored their request, so Wang Jackman came to his school and told him, "Listen, it's not going like this anymore, and we don't approve of what you're doing, and you have to stop giving white people martial arts lessons. But since I see that you won't, we'll have to solve it with a fight. You and I will fight, and if I win, you will have to close your school forever. And if you win, we will allow you to continue giving white people kung fu lessons." Bruce Lee accepted and was convinced that he would win. At that time, he was intensively engaged in martial arts and was really extremely fast, and he perfected his techniques to perfection. He was fully prepared and was waiting for the day when they agreed that the fight would take place. It was 1964, and Bruce Lee appeared at the appointed place and found himself face to face with Wang Jackman. At that time, the greatest Chinese masters gathered around them, and they all eagerly wanted to see who would win. Those days, Bruce Lee was dating Linda Cadwell, who would soon become his wife. Do you remember the day when Bruce, overwhelmed with anger, ran to the riverbank and sailed to the middle of the river in a boat, where he experienced the greatest realization of his life up to that point? Well, this fight was the next big turning point in his life, and now you're gonna see why. The fight lasted longer than Bruce Lee expected, and that surprised him quite a bit. He was confident because he was very proficient in kung fu techniques, but Wang Jackman was a worthy opponent. Both of them fought for a long time, and no one wanted to surrender.
15 minutes later.
In the end, Bruce Lee won. However, even though he won, he didn't feel like a winner. Dissatisfaction simmered in him, and the reason for that dissatisfaction was something that would change him for the rest of his life. The thing is, Bruce Lee had always focused only on perfecting his technique and what he really excelled at, but what he also always overlooked would later turn out to be a very important part of his training program, and that is physical training. Fighting against such a skillful and equal opponent, Bruce Lee was not able to easily apply his techniques to him. Fortunately for Bruce, Wong Jack Man lost his strength before Bruce Lee did. But the question is how long Bruce Lee could last. When the fight started, he was covered in worms, ruddy and panting, and instead of being proud that he had won, not long after the fight, when the excitement wore off, he began to be tormented by his thoughts. For the first time in his life, he realized that techniques are not important at all if they are not accompanied by good physical endurance. Because it's for nothing that you know how to perform the technique well, but if the fight lasts longer, you lose strength and become weak. From that moment, he began to devote a lot of energy to strength training, including conditioning, improving the strength of the abdominal muscles, which are the most important muscles in the whole body for punching and kicking. And he also saw the importance of flexibility in martial arts that allows you to perform high and precise strikes. And if you take a closer look at the Lee's picture before the fight with Wong Jack Man, you will see that he really did not dedicate much importance to physical strength and endurance training. And it is also completely clear that you can see the continuous development of his muscles after that fight. With that victory, Bruce Lee gained great popularity, especially among whites, and that eventually enabled him to open more schools and expand his influence. The years that followed were mainly marked by Linda Cadwell, the love of his life, whom he met in a very interesting way. So, seeing the importance of fitness and its great role in martial arts, he regularly began to exercise in the morning by jogging, cycling, and skipping rope. And I am sure that many of you are interested in precise and accurate data about how often he ran, what distance he could run, and in what time, and many other interesting facts related to training. But in this video, in which I want to explain why he is the best fighter of all time, I will deliberately not touch on his training and physical achievements. As you have already seen, until now I have never talked about how much he exercised, or what exercises he did. I will talk about that in the future videos, but what I wanted to do in this video is to show, as I said, why Bruce Lee is the best. And the best fighter is not only made of his skills, but his mentality. Because he wouldn't have achieved any of the previously said achievements if he didn't have the mentality he had. That is why it is always most important whenever you observe or even want to imitate or learn something from a successful person. The most important thing is always to pay attention to one's mentality. Losers are losers and remain losers because they have a loser's mentality. As soon as they change their mentality, they would easily become winners. Because when you change your mindset, you can achieve anything. But if you try to achieve something, you will never achieve it unless you change your mindset. You can have, superior genetics and predisposition to become a great athlete or powerlifter. But if your mentality is not such that you really want it, and if you are not ambitious and desirous of it, you will never achieve it no matter how good your genetics are. Bruce Lee definitely had good genetics, but many don't know that he was also born with a lot of physical defects and deficient on course. He wasn't handicapped, of course, but he had some flaws that would discourage 99% of people from following the path that he had followed. However, his desire was to become the biggest Chinese superstar in Hollywood.
I never met anybody in my life, ever, that I felt wanted to be a star more than Bruce.
Which, despite all the racial prejudices of the time, really seemed like a big obstacle. But his desire and vision were stronger than anything else, and that's why he is the biggest star today. He is a great inspiration and motivation to thousands, even millions of people and children around the world, including me. I truly hope you enjoyed this video, and that it opened up your eyes even a little bit, and that now you will look at the world at least a little differently. The goal of these videos is for you to hear the story of a famous, but above all, successful person, no matter what profession he or she was engaged in. Because the profession is just a mold, that's what we do every day. But the essence is what's under the mold, that's the core. And that core is nothing else but a mental set of personality that is universal for all successful people. So guys, I hope you like this video, but know that this is not the whole story of Bruce Lee. So expect the second part in a few days, and believe me, the second part is even more interesting and, as I would say, much deeper. So if you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more educational and interesting videos where you can learn how to become the best version of yourself and finally make people around you happy. That would be it. I'll see you guys in the next video.